Okay, it is 5:09 and I will call the special meeting of the governing board to order. Let's go ahead and call roll to establish quorum. I'm going to start with my virtual board members. Ms. Preciado, Mr. Shibley,
Present virtually.
thank you. Mr. Shaw,
Present.
Dr. Ayala,
Present.
and Ms. Robertson, myself, is here as well. Ms. Balakian, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Place your right hand over your heart and repeat after me. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Ms. Balakian. At this time, members of the public may comment on any open session agenda item. Comments from individual speakers are limited to 3 minutes. Public comment for special board meetings are restricted to items on the agenda. Once the meeting agenda has been approved, no further speaker slips will be accepted. As a reminder, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. At this time, we will also accept speaker slips to comment on items to be discussed in closed session. Comments from individual speakers are limited to 3 minutes. And at this time, I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
I have a first by Mr. Shaw and a second by Dr. Ayala. I'm going to run down the list for our virtual members. Ms. Preciado,
Yay.
Mr. Shibley,
Yay.
Mr. Shaw, Dr. Ayala,
Yay.
and I am yay as well. That's 5 yays. We can ask her.
Ms. Preciado, can we test your volume or something because we're barely hearing you?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm actually out of town for a funeral and we're traveling back home, so I'm putting on my volume up. Is that a little better?
We're still having trouble hearing you, Ms. Preciado. I don't know if you have headphones on or a Bluetooth connected or if it's just your device, but whenever we get to you for questions or answering questions or other discussion, it sounds like you're going to need to speak very loudly. You might have to yell.
Perfect. I will do that for you guys.
Oh, there we go. We got you. Whatever you did there, we got you. Okay, so let's go ahead and move into our action items, our annual budget priorities workshop. And for this, we go to Ms. Stopper.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. If we could please pull up the presentation. We'll get started. Okay, we'll just do that a little bit better. Thank you. All right, so this evening, we want to start with providing our board members and our community with an update on our budget priorities. So first off, the governor set forth his proposed budget in mid-January. And so we are currently working on developing next year's budget based off of this proposal, as well as adjusting the current year budget based on some of the information that he provided. So one of the themes of his proposal was that currently California seems to be in a very unique situation. On one hand, we hear there's so many revenues out there and that there's going to be money all over the place to support schools and other organizations throughout the state. And yet, day to day, Californians find it hard to live normal lives because inflation is just escalating at such an extreme rate. And so we find ourselves kind of in a contradictory situation. But what we do is we plan the best we can. So what we're doing is we're looking at the governor's proposed budget, and he is attempting to tackle some of the issues that have transpired since COVID began head on by expanding on services for Californians and strengthening the ability of the state to address crises that come up in the unknown future. But at the same time, he does know and does admit that not every problem can be fixed with cash. And so we're doing what we can to support our organizations, our schools, but also knowing that just because you throw cash at it doesn't mean we'll have the staff available to support schools because we're currently in a staffing shortage or a staffing crisis. So that was the first part of the theme of his proposed budget. The next are a few significant items that I wanted to kind of bring to your attention. So the state is seeing a really high surplus in their general fund revenues. And so what the governor has to do to balance the budget is start spending those down. You'll see there's going to be a lot of categorical relief for schools, which means money, but with restrictions. So following within certain guidelines and allowable spending uses. The reason for some of these general fund revenue surpluses is a significant increase in what the Department of Finance as well as the governor's office projected for personal income tax as well as sales and use tax. Those are two of the big three taxes that make up our Prop 98 calculation and our minimum guarantee. So another item that will have a huge impact on schools is the governor's budget reflects a significant reserve and has to make some deposits into the budget stabilization account, or also known as the rainy day fund, and the public school system stabilization account, as well as the general operating reserve. So you'll see a little later in our presentation the impact to schools based on those deposits into the, or proposed deposits into the reserves. So on top of that, we're still in an economic pandemic, not only with our people throughout the state, but also our businesses, our schools, our economic system is still in a state of unknown. We don't necessarily know how we're going to come out of this pandemic long term. And then again, just another bullet point, because it is such a major concern, is inflation is rising at historical rates. We haven't seen this increase in inflation since 1982. So 40 years ago. I almost said 30, but then you guys would question my math. I was like, 40. All right, it has been. I'll get this to go forward. There it goes. Okay, so first off is Prop 98. This is how we calculate the revenues that are going to be allocated to schools across the state. And so some of the big things that come into play this year are not only do we have a lot of revenue coming our way, but now we have strings. So we will have to spend down our reserves. And then we are going to have to redevise our spending plans and our strategic priorities to align with new categorical funds that are coming our way, but also knowing that the unrestricted dollars are not rising at the same rate as which the categoricals are. So if you think back to when Governor Brown was in session, when we went through the Great Recession and came out of it with the local control funding formula, the idea was to take away categoricals and move back to a local control funding formula. So meaning the district or the local agencies set the priorities for how the money was to be spent. The state wasn't dictating it. And so now we're getting a mixture of both. We're getting a mixture of our LCFF revenue, which is unrestricted and tied to our LCAP plans, And then now we're starting to see those categoricals coming back with significant strength. Oh, there we go. Sorry, I went too far. Is this not working? Okay. So throughout the presentation, I'm going to touch point on the governor's commitments that have an impact on Lemon Grove School District. So the big points here are our ongoing commitments. So this is money that is anticipated to come this year as well as in the future years. So the governor's proposal committed the statutory COLA of 5.33%. Keep in mind that the COLA is determined based on 8 different factors, 7 of which have come in. The 8th one will not be realized until just before the May revise. So that is why we have some fluctuation in COLAs from governor's proposed budget to the May revise and even into the enacted budget. We also are going to see an expansion on the expanded learning opportunities program. So different from the grant was one time usable over a couple years, and then we now have an ongoing program for expanded learning. We're going to see a continued commitment to preschool, as well as transitional kindergarten with lower class size ratios. He's continuing to commit to increasing our special education-based grant funding to support schools, knowing that special education significantly outpaces the revenues that are driven from our local control funding formula for those same students. And then also the last biggest commitment that impacts our district is universal meals for students. Some one-time commitments that he has proposed, which we will do our best to take advantage of, are school facilities funding through the general fund, not through a state bond program, kitchen facilities funding, as well as funding for electric buses. There we go. I'm sure you guys are probably tired of hearing about the ADA cliff. I think we've been talking about it for 3 years now, knowing that it was coming and it's right around the corner. So it's been the subject of many discussions across many boardrooms across the state of California. Well, the governor and the legislator are listening. They're hearing what we're having to say. They understand the dilemma that we find ourselves in. And so this slide here is a representation of the fact that we are still being funded at our 2019-20 ADA. We have been held harmless since then. And next year is when we're going to see this cliff in our ADA funding. And so they recognize it and they have some proposals that are coming. Yes.
On the cliff, that would be funding based on our current, like this year's ADA, correct? Or would it,
I will get into that in a little bit, but no, right now in legislative law, we have 2 options for determining where we're going to be funded. It's the greater of either the prior year ADA or the current year ADA. So in 2022-23, we will have to estimate, is our 21-22 ADA higher than what we think our 22-23 ADA is. Currently in 21-22, we're still being funded on the 19-20 rates.
okay, but we will have the option to fund based on our like current ADA at the time.
Yeah, it's not really an option. They just automatically go with the highest one when they certify our principal apportionment. It's the
Okay.
highest of the 2 calculations.
Okay, sorry, I just want to make sure. Because never mind, thank you.
Yeah, no, I think I get where you're going with that. There's a little bit of uncertainty because you're trying to determine, is last year going to be higher than the current year, not knowing what the current year is going to be. And you're developing that budget plan 6 months in advance of when students actually start attending school and showing up for class. So
Well, yeah, and this year's
this year is
really bad.
we're
Thank you.
not building this year into our projections because we're hoping this is an anomaly and we're going to find our way out of that. If we include preschool, we're a little over, I believe, 3,300. Without preschool, we're just I think in January, our enrollment was 3261. And at fall one, we were at 3249 or 3248. So we're just hovering around those mid 32. Thank you. So one of the commitments that they are recognizing or hearing when we voice our concerns to the state and to the appropriate parties who kind of hear our collaborative efforts in the meetings that our county office goes and attends and shares our concerns is we have a two-headed monster now. It's not just declining enrollment across the state, but now it's the ADA to enrollment percentage. So what we were just speaking about this year being hopefully an anomaly, but we don't know. We thought declining enrollment was going to be an anomaly, and it seems to have kind of just trickled slowly around throughout the state where students are leaving California for various reasons. Well, now we have an issue with the enrollment to ADA percentages. We're looking at significant declines in the current year due to various factors, which are a direct result of the pandemic, in addition to the declining enrollment, meaning we have less students attending in person. We have various problems with the independent study program and problems just not from, an instructional standpoint, but more of like an operational. How do we get those signed master agreements? It's not as easy as it is, when they put it into law, hey, just get this signed from the parents. It's not that simple. So we struggle with that. And then also homework being turned in so that we can actually claim credit for those assignments being completed. It's not happening. It's not, even though like the opportunities there, it's just not coming to fruition. So that's the two-headed monster that they're trying to tackle with the proposed solution that the governor put forth in January. And while there's many solutions on the table, there's actually quite a few bills floating around legislative, either the Assembly or the Senate right now. Current law, if you look at the left side of the screen in yellow, is how we are currently funded through the local control funding formula, and that's current year ADA or prior year, whichever is greater. The governor proposes a third option, and that's in that blue bar on the right. He proposes the same current year or prior year, but also wants to add the computed average of average daily attendance. I know we use average twice there, but using the prior 3 years. So that's if we were looking at 22, 23, we wouldn't even include that year's ADA as one of our calculations. We're going to use the last 3 completed years. So that could be a significant benefit. We are still going to have to take into account 21, 22, but we're going to get to average that out over 3 years. And I'll show an example of what that looks like next. All right, next slide, please. Thank you. So here's an example of what we're looking at when we're looking to the future for our 22-23 school year. So the governor proposed $1.2 billion to amend our LCFF attendance calculation to provide direct relief to school districts seeing that significant drop in ADA. And what we are looking at here is as of January 2022, our attendance ADA was about 2810. If we're looking at the greater of the two for current law, we're going to assume we're rolling back to more natural attendance rates, students in school significantly more than the current year. And we're going to go back to our average attendance over the last 5 years where we're projecting about a 94% attendance rate. The 2,810 is a 76% attendance rate. Or I'm sorry, 86% attendance rate. Sorry, it's 8% lower than the 94% in which we think we're going to resume in the next school year. That would be current law, and that's what we are. Yes, go ahead.
When you're done making your point.
So that's what we're going to use in our second interim projection coming up next week. And then if the proposal goes through, we will build our adopted budget after the May revise with this potential proposal, which would increase our 88 by about 28 students. So that 28 students on our base grant rate, not knowing whether they would apply for some of the categoricals or supplemental concentration, would be about $250,000 difference in our revenue. Go ahead.
Is the legislation that is proposed on the, like from a legislator side, that's based on enrollment, is that going to be decided in this session?
So I attended a conference with FICMAT, which they have a direct advisory committee with the governor's administration as well as School Services of California. That was a couple weeks ago. And at that point in their meetings, they had said that funding based on enrollment is not something that would actually take place in the 22-23 year. But since then, additional proposals have been submitted and they seem to be gaining a lot of traction in the legislature. So we'll see where that goes. But FICMAT and SSC, and they're both like strong advisory committees to the state as for all the school districts. Both of them seem to think that it was unrealistic that that could happen in the next school year and that we would be looking for that change to come somewhere in that 23-24 school year if it were to go through.
I have a question about the attendance rates. How did you come up with those attendance rates? What's the kind of methodology for
For attendance, for which year?
that? Just in general, how are you, is the computation done differently by each scenario or is it done?
No, it's done similar. It's attendance to enrollment. So that tells you your projected rate in which you can then assume your funding. There are different categories for the attendance. We have TK through 3. There's a specific rate in the base grant for that grade range or grade span. And then we have a different base rate for 4th through 6th and then 7th through 8th. So all of them have different funding rates assigned to it. But attendance is the same. It's if you're enrolled and attend, then you get credit for that day, and that counts towards our total average daily attendance.
What was the percent though they used? You said 70 and then you said 90.
Sorry, yeah, no, it's our average is 94%,
Okay.
and we're currently sitting 8% below that. So we're about 86% right now. And
It's 94% in prior years.
yes,
It's
normal year.
86.
86% this year, or as of January. It's been fluctuating a little bit. At first interim, we were around 88, almost 89%, and we've gone down again since even then.
We could jump up again, given kind of what's happening right now with the lower case rate.
And these numbers assume which percent?
These numbers are all three. So you're going to see the top one is our 86%. Our middle one is assuming next year we'll return to 94%. And then the below calculation is the average of 3. So it was a little over 94% in 1920, and then it was about 94% in 2021, and then it is 86% in, or currently, and if we end that way. All of these are based on our P2 attendance reporting to the state, which gets finalized in April.
And it is based off P2,
Yes.
regardless of what
Regardless.
happens between now and the end of the year.
There are a couple funding sources that use our annual rate of attendance, which then gets finalized at the end of school. But a bulk of all of our funding comes from P2.
And so we're not necessarily tweaking that. We're just rolling whatever's in the P2, right? We're not saying we really think it should be 88.
Right
Not- okay.
now. For the first box, the 2021, 2022, that is current. So. And hopefully it goes up, but I like to report what it actually is until it changes. We'll roll with it as we see that change come through. So now we're going to start going into the ongoing commitments in a little bit more detail. First, that commitment to the COLA, the 5.33% COLA. So you'll see here a chart of some of the biggest key points in our planning factors and how we look at this year, next year, and the future years that we're required to report on. And so 5.33% is that proposed COLA that the governor put out, as well as next year's CalSTRS, CalPERS, and unemployment insurance rates. So these rates drive many of the factors in which we use to budget for our current and future year. Yep. Okay, so this is the base grant that I was referring to, having the different rates based on the different grade spans. So you can see on this chart how we have K through 3, 4 through 6, 7 through 8. These-
Sorry, can you go back? I just want to just explicitly point out so we're about what, 85 to 87% employee costs really on the budget. So if you're looking even just specifically at CalSTRS and CalPERS contribution rates on the side of the district, those are pretty good increases that we have to absorb. The governor had bought down those increases in the prior 2 years, but he's signaling at least now that they're not going to do that.
Correct. There's been a little bit of a rumor that CalPERS may reduce down by less than 0.3%, but that won't be voted on until their board takes action on that, which won't be until, I believe, April or May of this year. So it's right before or right during the May revise. There we go. So moving back to our base grant increase, this is 80% of our budget comes from our local control funding formula. And so these rates are very significant to us. So when we see a 5.33% COLA, we immediately go out and take a look at what does that do to our base grant? And then what does that average out across all of our grade spans? So we have an idea of what that increase is going to be on a per ADA basis. And then you'll see we didn't really apply a per ADA amount to supplemental and concentration because that's not a guarantee amount per student. It fluctuates based on the students that become eligible for those grants. Okay, so one thing I wanted to share with you is what does that 5.33% look as far as revenue goes? When we're doing our revenue calculations with the funding formula model, what does that really look like? And so I gave 2 scenarios for you here. The first scenario is not our school district. This is a school district that has no change in enrollment. And if the governor says, hey, I'm giving you a 5.33% COLA, what does that look like? So if you take a look at it in the prior year total of 36.1 million, that 5.33% would jump them up to $38 million. That's significant, is $1.9 million in revenue. That's fantastic. That'll go a long way to supporting students. Then you take a look at a district who has been in declining enrollment for the last couple years while being held harmless. And let's say we have a 2% decline, which we are projecting for next year. You'll see we go from that $36.1 million, which we were receiving in the prior year, and with a 5.33% COLA compounded with the change in our projected ADA, we're actually losing revenue. We're not going to be able to sustain the same level of spending as we were in the prior year because we don't even have the same funding source. So we have to find ways to absorb that difference with our declining enrollment and start doing some right sizing of our expenses to be truly aligned with the students that we're serving instead of the students that we were serving 3 years ago. So that was just one model that I want to show you. There's multiple impacts on what COLA does for our district, but
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I would like to ask a question about the declining enrollment. For the projected declining enrollment, is this just K to 8?
we are projecting a 2% decline K through 8, and then we're going to build in our projected increase for TK expansion and also possibly some expansion on kinders actually were enrolling in the district. So we've seen a decline in those that have chosen to enroll in kindergarten over the last couple of years due to the pandemic. So I actually will get to that later in the presentation as well, like how we're projecting our enrollment for next year and how that comes into play with all of this. So
Okay, perfect.
yeah, I'll definitely walk you through all of the things that we took into consideration.
But this right here
Yes.
is K8.
Yes.
The other thing too, that's a point I definitely want to hit home to is we haven't laid off staff in the prior 2 years. even though we had declining enrollment. And that was because the state didn't want us to. So they gave us funding. They held our funding basically the same because they knew that there were going to be large impacts to the economy, and they really wanted to maintain employment through especially schools. So it really was like, we're holding your funding steady, you hold your staffing steady. That's not the case moving forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so now that we took a look at what it would look like for us on the revenue side of the house, let's start looking at expenditures. So some of the things that we know we have to account for in the future years and current year is some of those statutorily negotiated increases as well as our collective bargaining negotiated increases. So if we look here on this chart, I gave an estimate on our base growth, not just on base grant funding, but taking a look at our LCFF calculator, I estimated our unduplicated pupil percentages rolling out 3 years because we get to use a rolling 3-year average on that. And I assumed that we would hold a little steady, maybe decline just a tiny bit as we saw declining enrollment. So I declined our UPP percentage 2% along with enrollment, just so that we would have a similar basis for how we're calculating out our projected revenue. And so this base growth, instead of the average of $440 per ADA, you're going to see it's $563 per ADA. And that takes into account our supplemental and concentration grant funding projected using unduplicated pupil percentages for next year being held at a similar rate to this year with a slight decline due to enrollment. So that base growth of $563 that we're going to see on the revenue side is kind of on a per ADA basis. What you're going to see that we have to take into account now is the increase to our CalPERS statutory rates. That's going up 3.19%. And so that salary base of the 8.5 million is our classified staff, just under, because not everyone is eligible for PERS, but that increased cost would be $272,000 or equivalent of $89 per ADA. So I tried to put this all into a kind of a per ADA impact for everyone to see kind of where that money goes and then what we have to do to kind of figure out how to make this work since there's not enough funds to cover committed costs. And how do we do that? Where do we go? What are our options? So STRS is going up 2.18% or 475,000. Step and column across all of our classifications is about 2% across grades. So if you look at that, we've done the salary base for both classified and certificated, and the cost for step and column annually is just around 600,000. Next, we have a 2.5% on schedule negotiated increase for next year. So we know where we're going to land. At least that's one positive. We don't have the unknown cloud of what do we need to negotiate. So that cost is going to be just under 775,000. Our workers' compensation insurance tends to fluctuate based on liability claims, things like that. We anticipate it going up about 0.25%. And that would cost us about $25 per ADA. And then lastly, health and welfare. We don't know our rates for the next calendar year, but conservatively, we plan for about a 6.5% increase, and that would be about $86 per ADA. So you add all those up, and when you take that into account and look at our base growth, we're actually short $243 per ADA on what we have to fund salaries and benefits, which is our 85% of our budget goes to our staff and the staff that we need to support the students. So you can see we have a little bit of work to do to figure out where we're going to make up for that. So this is just another way of viewing that same information instead of a chart. Some people are very visual. SSC kind of gives a very similar perspective when they present to us their take on the governor's budget. And I love that visual chart because it shows revenue in the blue and then all of the different expenses, as you can see, and they tied to the little legend up top with the color coding. And so you can see each one of them just chips away at that revenue growth. Oops, I think we went one too far. It's going back. Can we go the other way? There we go. One other large expense that much of Southern California sees as the biggest headache right now is our utilities expenses. And so I wanted to give a little representation of what's been going on over the past few months here in San Diego, because we actually have a coalition for energy cost reduction for the San Diego schools. 40 of 42 schools are in this coalition, and that this coalition fights directly for school districts with the California Public Utilities Commission, as well as with our local energy provider, so San Diego Gas and Electric. And what they do is they represent us, trying to get us the best rates to operate our schools. And there are two things that are going to come into play this year. And one of them is in 2019, the California Public Utilities Commission had a general rate case in which we have been working to negotiate a schools only rate. SDG&E was actually a supporter of this negotiation with the Public Utilities Commission. And unfortunately, that proposal for negotiation was rejected. And so we were proposing a schools only rate, meaning the energy utility company could charge us the same cost at what it would be to provide that same energy. And so to really keep us from having those inflation rates like our commercial and our residential customers. Well, that didn't go over so well. So what's going to happen is we're going to remain at our commercial basis, meaning if we are a medium size, considered a medium size district, we would be on the medium to large commercial rate. And even small school districts are going to see quite an impact too, because they may not have as many resources, but they're on the small commercial rate. So they too are not going to be able to benefit from the negotiations that have been taking place over the last 3 years. So what that means to us is we were probably going to see about an 8.5% increase in our utility costs for electricity alone. Another big thing pending is our net energy metering, or NEM, as it's called. So we have 3 solar farms on our property. Those solar farms generate energy as long as there's sun out, whether there are kids in school or not. We utilize that energy all day long. And for whatever we have as excess, we're now going to see a change in how we're receiving credit for that. So originally, when we installed the solar, we were under the original NEM plan, or the original net metering plan, in which we would receive credit back at the retail rate for our excess energy. Then came NEM 2, in which they said, well, we're still going to give you credit, but we're going to deduct certain things that are non-bypassable fees, such as when the nuclear plant was decommissioned, and other operational costs that they have to produce that energy, they're bypassing on to us and taking it from our credit rate. Next, we see this year, there is NEM 3, which is pending approval with the California Public Utilities Commission, in which now they want to take even more out of that credit. So basically almost eliminating the credit that comes to schools for excess solar. And we really see that excess credit coming in our summer months when we don't have as many staff and students in school. So just 2 big things that are coming up, and those latest announcements came from the coalition, and the impact with their legal team on how it's going to really hit us in this next year just came in December from them.
I have a question, and you might not know right off the top, the percent increases. What does that translate to per, I like the chart where you talked about, broke it down by per EDA, but what is the dollar value? How's that?
Well, if we're at an 8%, we're about a $900,000 a year in electricity costs. And so, oh, you're giving me a day when my brain's hurt. 8.5% of 900,000. So
yeah,
there you go. About 76,500. And if we divide that by ADA of the 3,068,
it is.
that's what it ends up being.
So right now, based on that, the 240 is really like more like 250, right? the 243.
Now let's see if I can
Okay.
find a similar impact. So we would say workers' compensation insurance, we're projecting to go up just under 76,000. So we're looking at just over a $25 increase per ADA for anticipated electricity costs for running the schools.
And then if we increase our capacity on the solar, there's no advantage to that? Like what's our
There
capacity?
is, the capacity by increasing solar benefits us for all energy consumption during the time in which solar produces energy for us. So we're actually seeing quite a benefit in reducing our consumption. And we have the luxury of most of our energy costs come during the day when those solar panels at their highest efficiency. So solar isn't like even expanding solar isn't necessarily a bad thing, but what we're going to see is less of that credit and savings during the times in which we're not in school, but it will always support us with direct costs.
Mhm.
So yes, by no means am I saying don't go solar. I'm just saying we're not receiving the same type of benefit that we have realized in prior years. It's just.
So who do
So,
we need to lobby?
Right?
so what I'm hearing, San Diego Gas and Electric always find a way to get their money.
Yes, they do. So think about that time of use. Now that's part of this whole transition in the NEM to the NEM 2 and NEM 3. Well, now time of use becomes a thing where from 4 to 9, you're getting your highest rates. Well, is there a solar from 4 to 9? Only for those people who are directly facing west and only at the times of year when we have enough direct sunlight rays to impact the solar panels. So it may still look light out, but you aren't getting actual energy credit or benefit from
Because it's
those
only when the
twilight
sun,
hours.
because it's only when the sun is actually
Yeah,
impacted.
you have to have a fairly straight impact on the
Mhm.
rays in order to generate electricity. So.
Mm.
I haven't done a good job of checking in with our virtual board members. Do either of you guys have, either of you have any questions?
Just going back to the solar, I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, we only have solar at the Palm campus.
We have it at 3 of our campuses. We have it at Palm, we have it at San Miguel, and we have it at Mount Vernon.
Oh yeah, I remember San Miguel. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, coming away or? So to roll out the solar at the other campuses, is that through a grant or is that direct budget to us or how did that? Because I know the technology has changed a lot.
We would have to explore some energy opportunities available. I know there are fewer and fewer grants out there to support it, but it doesn't mean that they're not there. They just come and go and have different eligibility periods. So we would have to explore that. Right now, we are looking into some potential solar options for an electric bus to be able to support the energy for that and not have any increase to the electricity. So we're working with Grossmont Union High School District a little bit with some of the support staff that they have in place. And one thing is they have an energy director that I think we're going to try and utilize her knowledge to see what we have available to help us get some panels to charge that bus midday between pickup and drop off. So just something we're exploring right now, but that's such a small scale project in comparison to a whole school. So, you know, definitely expanding on that. Just needing a little bit more resources to work on those projects. We haven't really had some downtime in our capacity to explore, but it is on the top of our list as something very important to do, to go as green as possible and find ways to support the environment as well as our district.
And just for your historical reference, all of our solar projects were funded with bond funds.
Mhm. Because presently, we have 2 buses, but they're gas burning
Mhm.
or diesel, okay? And so now you're looking, but we also rent one from Grossmont, correct?
Mhm.
And so we're looking at purchasing a 3rd bus, but it would be electric.
Yes, we are looking to apply for a grant to go out for an electric bus.
Mhm.
That's one of the one-time commitments that the governor put out is an increase in funding for electric, I don't know, I keep saying electric transportation. And we're hoping to get our hat in the ring for that first round of funding.
Mhm.
So we've been working with 2 different bus vendors to explore like what's going to meet our needs and what's going to be the best fit for our district. And then also at the same time, having to determine if we have the charging capacity that will help support fully recharging during the day and then avoid us coming back after drop off and having to charge at those higher 4 to 9 rates. So things that we're looking into right now. Next slide, please.
Sorry, I still have another question about.
Yeah,
I
that's
know,
okay, go
kind of seems like the solar,
No, it's okay.
you mentioned it's 3 schools, but what percent of, what is the savings we get from solar? What percent would that be?
I would have to pull a report. I do know on our last report, just top of the line, kind of like big picture, is we are getting the energy that they projected we would get. In fact, we were receiving a little bit more energy than what was projected when we did this solar project. And so that's one of the things we do. We have a maintenance company that comes out and maintains the solar panels, makes sure they're all working properly, fixes any of them that maybe like aren't working as efficiently or maybe become uncabled or something like that, so that we're always continuing to produce as much as possible. And then I think we saw an additional savings of just over 15,000 from those above what was projected. So we are on track with that. So we are seeing the savings that we thought we would, but we don't build into the budget what our true cost of electric is. We're building in what we think we're going to net with solar along the way. And so one of the benefits is we did see a little bit more savings than anticipated last year.
And
So we get that report once a year.
And that 15,000 is in addition to what, 100,000?
I would have to pull the report to tell you what we thought our anticipated savings would be, and I can give you a percentage on what that looks
Yeah,
like.
I'm just curious because if we decide down the road to do the other schools, we
Mhm.
we know exactly what the savings to our budget would be and to our community. I think that'd be really a good selling point.
We can do a update in the memo to the board.
Yeah, we can
Okay.
pull that report.
I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but would there be any benefit into, and I don't even know if there's grants for this, but would there be any benefit into looking into like solar power storage? Or no? Do you
No.
think there would be?
Yes, I think that's the hot topic right now in the energy world, or at least in the world of people who are tired of paying SDG&E rates.
Yeah.
How do we keep what we've generated? And so this is the analogy I've used with a few other people. So we're producing all this energy and we're getting charged at like say 40 cents per kilowatt hour. But yet when we sell it back to SDG&E or get credit for it, we're getting 1/1000th of a penny. And
Yeah. So
just
basically
please-
we're
these are
making,
all like, these are all made up numbers, but it just kind of, it's an analogy, like it's not exact. So that 1/1000th of a penny, and then they turn around and charge us at 40 cents for that same kilowatt hour. It blows your mind. How is that physically possible that we could really like give them that?
we're basically
benefit?
giving them
And
free
yeah,
energy.
it's free. We're giving it away for free. So why not save it and use it? So definitely are exploring that. That's part of what we're looking at with the buses is not only the panels, but how do we store that energy? So if they don't fully charge between pickup and drop off, and then they come back and want to plug in, I'm going to plug in at 4 or 5 o'clock, which is our highest rate. How do we get them to plug into something we've already reserved or already
Charged
stored up?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's
So-
actually an amazing idea. We don't need SDG&E. We're gonna do it from the school district. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Look at
it-
Tim over here rolling his eyes at me.
Because I know there've been fires and other things, and somehow SDG&E always has a problem.
Uh-huh.
Yes, they do. So I think it would be very hard for us to go off grid, but
yeah,
what we
totally.
could do is find a way where we're semi off grid or supporting before we have to go on grid with some energy storage opportunities.
Well, if it makes sense fiscally, I absolutely support that because I'm all about going green.
Well, we are looking into it. And so
Good,
as
that's
soon as we
awesome.
have more information, we will provide updates on that. Next slide, please. So
And what-
on to some of
the
those
storage, yeah.
categorical programs that we discussed that were ongoing commitments. So this is still ongoing money. Is the expansion of our expanded learning program, so ELOP. And ELOP is similar to our after-school education and safety program, which is run by our expanded learning program, or yeah, so everything's like expanded learning. So we have a lot of acronyms all falling under expanded learning. But what that is really the time that we use to support the students before and after the school day begins and ends, and then as well as intersession times. So the governor proposed that we would see an increase of $3.4 billion to the ongoing money for the expanded learning opportunity program. What he hasn't broken that down yet, and that will come throughout the next few months, is how is that going to translate to a per pupil amount? And so what they're saying is, even though he's adding almost triple the amount of money into the program, it first goes priority to those higher unduplicated pupil rate schools, and then it trickles down to all the other districts. So for example, the first round or this school year, there was $1,170 per student for those districts that were over 80% UPP. And then after they were first allocated the funds, then the rest went to all the other schools. And we saw a rate of $672 per student. So quite a difference, not quite half, but I mean, significantly different. But what they said, even for the lower UPP percentage schools, is we will probably see double our rate next year. And this
Can
is
you
all a
remi-
maybe.
Sorry, can you remind me of our UPP? I know
We're-
it's pretty high.
We're about 75%.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought it was 75. That's disappointing because we're so close to that
So
80.
close. Yes.
Not that I want our families to be in that population.
No, but what we do want is to be able to provide them additional
same rate,
supports
yeah.
that would be reflective of their need. So yeah, there's a lot coming out too, and has been over the last couple of years with the hold harmless that directly has impacted our unduplicated pupil rate, along with the fact that that rate is largely determined by a free and reduced price meal program, which is set by federal standards. So the federal poverty level is nowhere near what a poverty level would be, a similar poverty level in Southern California. So it doesn't take into account like where you reside. It's the same rate across the board for all the states. So the federal poverty level in, actually, I don't want to say a random state because people say, well, what's wrong with that state? But just it's different. So New York and California really surpass that federal poverty rate significantly. Like we've shot past the finish line so far, that we aren't seeing the benefit for our families who are truly living in need, and we don't get to support them with some of the services that go to the districts that can generate those percentages. So, but the good news is we know we do have a program that we are just getting off the ground and running this year, and we will be able to expand it next year. So we're working on opportunities to expand that program, and you'll hear throughout the next couple months of how we think we're going to do that through various things such as expanding our music and arts programs and tutoring, and just very aligning some of the enrichment programs with the instructional day. Instead of having it be two separate things, it's going to we're trying to marry the two. So those are some of the things that come into play, but also in addition is the after school education and safety grant, which supports our current ACES program run by Expanded Learning. So I feel like I say Expanded Learning a lot, is we renamed the program from the Extended Day program to Expanded Learning to align with the state and how everything was coming out. Well, that program runs 84% of their grant is used to support salaries and benefits for their staff. And every year it's such a tight consideration to being able to also provide some of those materials and supplies services because of the increase to CalPERS competition in our job market for those minimum wage jobs. There's some of our lower paid staff, and yet we have to compete just to get people who want to work for a school district at our various points of time and limited hours and not receiving benefits unless you're full-time. And then also the cost of health and welfare, just for the few that are benefited, really takes an impact on that program. So the governor did commit to increasing the rate for after-school education program. And so we're going to see some support there, as well as an expanded learning opportunity program. Next slide. So I got ahead of myself when I was talking about expanded learning, because we have so many of those acronyms here and titles within our various programs, that this is what I was referring to with the additional $3.4 billion that's going into that program. And so that's where, we're going to see those almost double rates next year, and are working on as many supports as we can get in place to then help those children. Next slide, please. Next, we have preschool. So this has been a theme of Governor Newsom, is that he has put an emphasis on providing early childhood learning opportunities, especially all the way down to that preschool level. So right now we provide services to students that are in that 3-4-year-old range before they even become enrolled students in our system when they hit TK eligibility or kinder. So Governor Newsom's proposing several changes to that to establish categorical eligibility for children, meaning they become eligible if they have IEPs and the school system can support that. Also 24 months of continuous eligibility, meaning they don't have to renew up every year and have to provide all that documentation. So it's quite an arduous process to enroll in our California State Preschool Program. And there's a lot of documents that have to be reviewed and verified before a child is considered eligible for free preschool through the state. And so that's a couple benefits that I think are great. They also are expanding the opportunity to enroll 2-year-olds, which is quite significant. And that might be really hard on programs to have 2-year-olds, because 2-year-olds come with their own new challenge. But with the expansion of TK and some of those students that previously held preschool slots, and expanding out to 3-year-olds and continuing that eligibility period for longer, they're hoping to keep a fully operational preschool program, even with the expansion of TK, where we're kind of like dividing up the students a little bit. And so that's the other thing. TK students who would normally be in our state preschool program are now going to be eligible to be a part of our regular school day, the transitional kindergarten. And this year we expand the eligibility for that by 2 months, or I'm sorry, next year we expand that eligibility for 2 months. And so what the governor did to continue his commitment to transitional kindergarten is he is providing supplemental funding to support the lower classroom ratios. So in TK, we are 1 to 24 currently. Well, next year we're going to go down to 1 to 12. So he is providing additional funding to support that additional staff member in the classroom full day. So just for reference here, this year for 21-22, we have TK paras to support the 3 TK classrooms that we do have, but they're half-day paras, so they're not even there the full day for full support with that certificated teacher. Next year we'll have full day support, and to get those 1 to 12 ratios that the state's looking for us to achieve.
Sherry, can I ask you a question about preschool? Is the intention the same as TK, that it's going to be universally free regardless of income, or is it still going to be an income-based program?
They've changed the thresholds for income and those considerations. I am not well versed enough into what those changes are to really give you any real knowledge on what that changed. I did hear that the thresholds for income did change to make it more of an opportunity for families who maybe didn't qualify before.
Okay.
Do you want me to come back with an update on that?
I think, I mean, I think it's fine for the update to come through our weekly update, or even through the early childhood committee.
That's fine.
I'm glad we're committing to this as a state. There are things that I think are not being thought of. Like preschool is often a half-day program. So that kind of takes out working families still, even if you're not making very much. Because if you're working, you can't just leave 3 hours into it to go get your kids. But my hope is that they find the door to a program that works for everybody.
Well, they have proposed a couple additional supports in that area. So at least they did say that CSPP can provide wraparound services for their kids so that their students, so that there is more of that full day coverage. And then as well as they've opened up the preschool program to apply for full day programs. So there's a
So there'll be
potential
more
for
full day
that.
slots.
Yes, yes, they made it an opportunity, and I think there are a few webinars coming out in the next few weeks on how to apply for that. So I'd have to see. I know Melvetta has spoken of it, or I'm sorry, our early childhood education director, Ms. Owens, has been like looking into possibilities. I don't want to commit her either way.
That's fine.
It's just, yeah, like, will it fit for our model in our school facilities or not? To open that up, but she's working on doing that analysis to see if it's a possibility.
Thank you.
So along with preschool, the transitional kindergarten commitment statewide is to serve at least half day. Full day is also an option, but at least half day. So that's the mandate put out, is that we serve any student that's eligible if the parents choose to enroll their student in our program. So it's kind of an optional mandate, optional for the parents, mandated for the district. So we have to commit to providing that, as well as providing intervention supports, prevention supports, kind of that full inclusion to what the kinder through 8th grade students receive at our district. So that is a commitment that he's continuing to reaffirm. And you'll see that little people chart below. We've used it in a number of our facilities presentations, just so you can see each school year how we have that growth and eligibility for our students. Next slide, please. One other big area, our special education program. So year over year, our expenses for providing students with learning disabilities, the extra supports that they need, quickly outpaces that revenue that they generate through the local control funding formula. And so we have an additional funding source, and that's, we receive money from both the state as well as the federal government for these students. And the governor's committed to increasing that program funding significantly, where we go from this year, which we thought was a huge increase, with a base rate of $715, to next year an increase to $820 base rate per ADA for our special education program. And that's very helpful. It really goes a long way to supporting those extra interventions and supports that are necessary to make sure that the learning is developing early, so it mitigates the problem later on. So less problems later on when they find that the earlier you can get those supports out to the kids, the more inclusive in society they end up being. Next slide, please. And our last ongoing categorical commitment is universal meals. So beginning next year, we will be required to provide 2 free meals per day to any student who wants a meal. We actually go above and beyond that. We provide separate too throughout our program, but this is the requirement going into next year. One of the unintended impacts that this will generate, and I think we've seen over the last couple of years with the Hold Harmless, is that families don't need to fill out that meal application form anymore, or the income verification form anymore, because there's no incentive to do it. Their kids are eating for free no matter what. And so this is why I've conservatively been dropping our UPP rate when we're looking at our future years projections, is because we know that they're not going to want to fill out those forms. So it is going to have an impact on our supplemental and concentration grant funding. And we'll find ways to incentivize people to fill out those forms, but sometimes it's not enough, and we'll do whatever we can to really help this, and we will continue to do it. Just, it will be a side effect of providing free meals to students. So next slide, please. Now we're on to our one-time commitments. Next slide, please. So one-time dollars proposed for the 22-23 budget year is school facilities funding. And this is coming out of the general fund instead of the state bond program. So we have general fund dollars of $250 million to go to support new construction and modernization projects. From what I hear, this is probably going to go to most of those projects still in the pipeline. But we'll see. We're going to put our hat in for our TK facilities. And then also $490 million is being dedicated to the preschool transitional kindergarten and full day kindergarten facilities grant program, which we're in the process of working on our application to submit this by the end of this month for that new ECE or POM campus for our littles. So this is a lot of money, but it doesn't go anywhere near as far as I think people think. When you see 490 million, it's going to get eaten up pretty quickly. So one of the benefits of being a district of our size and with our unduplicated pupil percentages, we kind of start climbing the list. And then all the work that we've done over the last few months in our facilities planning to get us to a status of hardship level, we're going to apply for a hardship application in which we receive a higher level of funding for that TK facility campus. So really working to get every dollar we can when it's available from the state and what they put out and make available to us to apply for. Next slide.
Ms. Stopper, what are the qualifications for applying as a hardship?
So I would have to like pull up a slide from a prior facilities presentation, but it basically boiled down to debt to bond to debt capacity ratios. So if you had debt more than 60% of your capacity, you were considered hardship. That was one of the factors. Another factor is if you were assessing the highest level of developer fees, which the state board just adopted a couple weeks ago, their new rates. And so we're going to bring that to you next week to adopt the highest level of rate. And then I'm drawing a blank right now, but there was a third factor of which we felt in line with that. So once we adopt our next level of developer fees, we will be considered a hardship district and our application will go to the top of the line. Next, we have a one-time commitment to additional renovate kitchen facilities. So this school year in 21-22, there were kitchen infrastructure and training grants available, which we applied for. And it was allocated out on a $25,000 per district basis, plus an additional $2,000 for training your staff. So that's this year. Next year, they're going to provide a one-time $450 million kitchen facilities allocation, and then we will receive up to $100,000. So a much larger grant than what we had received in prior years. And so we'll apply for that as well. So that's non-competitive. It's going to be based on how many school districts are in the state. Then there's an additional $3 million to support expansion of either the breakfast or summer programs. And these are competitive grants. You have to apply for it, show a need, and you can get up to $15,000 per school. The deadline was today, so we did apply. So we'll see if we are awarded any of those competitive grants as well. Next slide, please. Transportation. Here's our energy discussions. So the proposal from the Governor Newsom to support transportation needs is by proposing $1.5 billion to support transportation and moving them to green, so going electric. And so I don't think this was exactly what school districts were lobbying for with transportation support. So in the local control funding formula, we are being held to a rate prior to the inception of LCFF in 13-14 for our home to school transportation. It's considered an add-on to our calculation. So it doesn't increase with COLA over the years. It's just the same at which it was when they adopted LCFF. And so we currently get just over $185,000 for our home to school transportation add-on, which is I think, a third of what our costs are for providing transportation. And we only provide transportation for a limited number of our students, those that have it built into their IEPs. It's not even our general student transportation to and from school. So schools were lobbying to have more of like an EDA basis for the funds that would be available from the state to support transportation. And what the governor came back with was, sure, I'll support transportation, but I'm going to give it to you in funding that pushes everyone to go from diesel vehicles to electric vehicles. So it's there, and it'll help us because it's right in line with us looking into an electric bus and what needs we have to go along with that.
I have a question about that. Is it restricted to only bus charging stations, or can it be multi-purpose?
I don't know if we're even going to get to do the charging stations. So the trailer language hasn't come out about this yet, and it probably won't until October, November of this year, because we have to get to the point of it being enacted in the budget, and then all of the trailer bills will come out in September, and then they'll be worked on and allocated by CDE as far as how is that going to be allocated out to districts or apportioned. So you won't even know more. There's also talks about this going through other programs already established, like the HPIV grant program, which has rolled out various funding opportunities for electric school buses in the past. It opens, and then within a few hours it closes because they've received all of their available slots for application. So we're not quite sure how it's going to roll out yet. We just know that it's coming and that we'll be getting in line to be eligible for that grant funding.
But they're not, I guess, maybe reframe my question. They're not restricted to only use for buses, right? Because, you know, many of these technologies you can use for buses and you can use for other things.
Well, I mean, charging stations for the buses, but so far we don't have enough knowledge of what those restrictions are going to be. We just know it's going to be for electric buses and to charge them. But what does that mean? Like, is it the charging station and the solar? Is it battery backup? I mean, we don't know what's going to be included in that yet, but we'll know more in the next few months for sure. It's in the infancy stage.
Right
of
now
that
it's open
proposal.
and it's still not restricted to only, right? At this point, we don't know if it's only, okay.
We don't know, but if we look at like past grants, it was strictly for the bus and the charging station, but not any of the other add-ons.
I do just a quick, we've been doing that work on the San Miguel, like reorganization on the staff parking lot. The city has actually indicated that possibly they can help us out with car charging stations. It's not like guaranteed or anything, but they felt like they had a connection at SDG&E that might be able to help us. So
Yeah, there may be some grant opportunities too.
all that
they
money
can
they're
apply
taking away
for.
from us.
Yeah.
So we'll keep exploring those opportunities and take advantage of them whenever we can. Thank you. So lastly, that's a lot. So you can see how above and beyond COLA, there's so many other opportunities, and they all come with various restrictions. And that's why we say categoricals are growing again. But some of the things we really wanted to point out that aren't in the budget, at least they weren't at the proposal, is there's no subsidy of the employer rates for the pension plans for CalPERS and CalSTRS. So we are going to see that growth, and we're projecting that in how we're looking to budget for next year. And then also the proposal only includes what our statutory COLA is. So in the past, we've received things like an augmentation of the COLA, and we've received a compounded COLA above and beyond what our statutory requirement is. There's no expectation for that as of now. So it's just what's set by law, and then what the governor's doing is taking those excess revenues or those surplus revenues and throwing them into these categoricals. And then lastly, not in the budget and a direct impact is the impact to our UPP for the universal meals. So just, it's going to be so significant that I wanted to mention it twice. It's something we have to keep in thought as we roll into the future. How do we get those forms and those applications back from our families? Next slide, please. So lastly, we finally get to district reserves. So this is where I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation how the governor is now going to be required to make a deposit into the rainy day fund. And that requirement is because the following 4 conditions are met. So if you look at those 4 colored boxes, we've met our test 1, we've met our maintenance factor, we've met our capital gains and our ADA and COLA. So all of this is calculated at a statewide level. I don't think anyone thought we would ever see all 4 tests being met. Well, we did. And the state now has to deposit money into the rainy day fund, which now triggers a reserve cap on local school districts. So we now are capped, next slide, please, at 10% of our general fund and special reserve fund ending fund balances. So when we take a look at our total expenditures and we divide that by our ending fund balance in both the general fund and special reserves that has not been committed, we cannot have more than 10% in our adopted budget starting in 22-23. So we're already on track with that. This year, we're projecting a 10% uncommitted general fund reserve and rolling through the 3 years, which makes it very hard to project expenses for 3 years, is because we also have to maintain a 3% reserve for economic uncertainty. So really, like, we have to make sure that we are looking at deficit spending on a structural level early, because we only have 2 years to correct in order to make sure we stay within our state reserve minimum guarantees in that second outer year. So it's really a handicap, and it's really an unfair disadvantage for school districts who are prudent in saving for those times where we may not have the luxury of a stable economy, and we may have to rely on those reserves. So it's really taking that power away from us and making us fully reliant on the state should we see a crisis such as the prior recession in 2008. So unfortunately, we are there now, but we have planned for it, and we're working through that very carefully each and every reporting period to make sure we're taking into consideration the changes that we need to look at for the future years to make sure we hit all of those minimums. Next slide, please. Now we're going to revisit our strategic priorities. So I know we've presented our strategic priorities before, but this is just a recap of the expenses that we've committed to the strategic priorities. Next slide. So here are our 4 priorities for fostering educational equity with multi-tiered systems of support. I won't go through each one because we did an in-depth review of those at our last board meeting, but what I want to do is go through the investments. So if we go to the next slide. So with priority 1, which is fostering student growth, leadership, and achievement, we had committed the investments to that priority with curriculum, professional development, intervention teachers at every site, additional classroom support, so additional para support, summer school for our students in both the 2021 and 2022 school year, as well as additional services with behavior analysts, psychologists, and TOSAs. So if you'll see, we had a 2-year commitment, and all of these we are committing to in the 22-23 year, and then the funding source tied to that. So we are not seeing any change in our investment priorities for priority 1. Next slide, please. So priority 2 is fostering staff growth, leadership, and collective efficacy. So this year you'll see for the 2 years we committed to Summer Learning Institute, instructional coaches, a principal coach, leadership stipends for our both certificated and classified staff, as well as expanding our assistant principals to provide a 0.5 or 0.5 assistant principal at each of the elementary schools. The only commitment that we are not continuing forward to 22-23 is the principal coach. Our principal coach retired. So we are going to absorb that and focus on the other investments in that priority. Next slide, please. So priority 3 is fostering school community and connectedness. And here we have committed to having our MTSS program Panorama, our parent volunteer coordinators at each site, family engagement centers at each site with parenting classes, and the parent volunteer coordinator would be there, as well as restorative practice training for all of our leads and social workers, and then a parent engagement TOSA. So all of those commitments are continuing. The only one that doesn't have a checkbox for next year is restorative practices because it's a one-time professional development expense, and where our staff that were trained are now going to be the trainers. So they're going to turn around and train our teams within the district, and so that won't have a cost to us. So it was a one-time cost up front. Next slide, please. And then lastly, we have priority 4, fostering operational systems that support effective schools. And here we have the same thing. We've committed to furniture refresh, so flexible furniture to support adaptive learning environments, updated classroom projection devices, refreshing our student staff technology, updating our classrooms so that the paint, the shades, the carpet, the tile, that's all being refreshed on a refresh basis. We've explored a master facilities plan, and we plan to upgrade some kitchens and other infrastructure upgrades. So the things that were one-time expenses will fall off from this year to next, meaning we've purchased already all of the projection devices needed for all of our classrooms. And so we are on schedule to have those all installed by the end of the year. And then we have completed our 10-year master facilities plan, and we have already adopted that. So that will not be an ongoing cost into the next year.
Furniture refresh?
Yes.
Do you have an idea of what percentage we are as far as getting to the classrooms? Because I know I walk around and some classrooms have been refreshed, but many have not.
Yeah, so to date, we have done, I want to say it was 33% of our classrooms. And what we had prioritized is the upper grades, so that the upper grades would be first in line for the new flexible furniture, so that as students go up, they're not coming into classrooms with new furniture and then going back to the older furniture. So we're going from the upper grades down. And so we've completely completed the middle school and all of the classrooms there. I think we're still waiting on the delivery of some of the furniture, but we have purchased it and have plans in place to have that all completed by the end of this year. All of the upper grades at Vista La Mesa. And then also next in the priority became our special day classes. So changing out and updating their furniture. So we've received some of it, and then we're still waiting on lead times for finalizing all those classrooms by the end of the year. And that will get us to about 33% of our classrooms. And then we'll start focusing on the next level, so 6 through down through K.
I think a lot of our 6th grade classrooms have it too,
Some of them do, yeah.
with some shifting that we've done.
Yeah, so at Vista La Mesa, they had already done some of the 7th and 8th grade classrooms. And then we had found an opportunity for those desk chair combos to make it very easy for the 7th and 8th graders to have more physically spacing between their desks and have their own like individual, almost high school style seating. So we bought that for all of the 7th and 8th grade classes at Vista La Mesa, and then they turned into the furniture that they had and put them down into their 6th grade classes. So it's, you know, we've definitely like shifted around some of the new furniture even in the last couple of years.
With this investment here, what does that get us to, do you think?
I think we could probably get to about 65% of our classrooms with this next investment. Costs are on the rise, and the cost for furniture has gone up 25% from just this last order that we placed to the previous order of the same furniture and needs. So it's inflation, and it's also supply shortages, and we're trying to work through all of that. So yeah, 25% just from our prior order to this year's order.
And then on the early childhood education campus, if we're able to move forward with that, that can actually be included in the cost, right? So that can be fully furnished with new furniture.
Yes, when Casa Studio did a projection or an estimate, even with the escalation on construction costs, assuming that $26.5 million facility, it included furniture, fixtures, and equipment, so FF&E. So it's including the cost of furnishing that entire school. So yes, that is not part of my percentages. When I'm giving you like 33% right now, maybe possibly get to about 65%. That's just for current itinerant classrooms in which our current students reside. If we expand out and don't fully furnish that, it would change our projections a little. The new campus, yes.
Oh, okay.
Com two.
So she's talking about,
The dirt lot.
built
dirt lot.
classrooms.
Yeah.
Mini palm.
Already constructed.
I don't know if it's gonna be palm or new name, I don't know.
That's a future agenda item,
Yeah, we have to come up with a name.
which we do have to get to.
It's not gonna, no,
No,
I mean, can't be. So,
Sounds like an opportunity for a donor naming. you know?
Yes, we do need to explore that and
yeah, we'll
look
put
into
your name on
establishing
it.
a donation opportunity for maybe someone to get a big name up on that school, help us out with some of the costs.
Yeah,
So if anybody knows anybody with $27 million,
oh, dang.
send them our way.
I know lots of people that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, I hang out with them all the time. Yeah.
Right. Next slide, please. So another budget priority that we wanted to bring back was at our last board meeting on February 17th. At the board's direction, they wanted to see some support for our STEAM investments at our Monterey Heights Elementary and what kind of financial assistance they would need to get that STEAM program up and running. And so the financial assistance would be in the amount of $80,000 in order to really have a successful program next year. 40,000 would go towards a consultant to support the program, and then 40,000 to supplies and equipment. So we brought this back as a budget priority, something that's currently not in our budget projections, and just wanted to make sure it was on your attention, brought it back at your direction for inclusion into next year's budget. And wanted to just see, is that still the wish of the board that we go in that direction? Knowing that we now have kind of a dollar value assigned to what we think it's going to cost.
I think for myself, I think it's, very conducive to the learning of our children. Have we looked to see if there's any, I know there's not nearly as many grants as when it was like brand new, but have we looked at like grants.gov or anything like that to see if there's any STEAM grants? STEAM or STEM?
we have not actively searched for STEAM funding. I do know that even though the direction, like the information or the communication to Rosalind is, we don't want you to do that. Like Mrs. Turner's, that's just kind of who she is. She'll probably continue to look for grants. But what we wanted to make sure is, one, that the board, not that we're asking you to make an action item, but for us to think about us in our planning in the next 2 months, that we wanted to make sure that that is in fact a priority of the majority of the board. And then what we would probably do, which is the same thing that we do for Mount Vernon, is ask for some co-funding out of site funds. So we do funding for Mount Vernon to continue their IB and their dual language, but they do co-fund, a certain dollar amount each year, probably, like we're funding probably 60 and they're funding probably 40. So we were thinking that just from an equity standpoint, we would also ask that Monterey Heights have a certain portion of it funded out of their site funds. And I would probably say, obviously not this year, but in future years, just also to offer other schools that might want to have a similar focus, that we begin to anticipate and build in that as well. They're in different stages,
Yeah, what I understood as well was that there's a the train-to-trainer approach, which the whole district can benefit from this initial investment. So upfront, it's actually not that much when you start thinking about the trainer, the PD, the curriculum, and then the benefits that can happen to the district. We start kind of looking at that cost over the whole district. It's actually really low per student. So it makes sense to do like an initial upfront kind of seed investment, and with the intent that it rolls out across the district somehow with the trainer model. So ends up being a lot less.
All right, I think, do we want anybody else, any of the other board members to weigh in on this before committing to projecting this into the budget?
I'll just say, is there anybody that would be opposed to that? Just so we can hear from them.
Well, I'm still hopeful that maybe there's another Conrad Presby out there. If anybody is listening that would like to help Lemon Grove in their efforts to expand our learning and education. Because when I was a student at San Diego State, we had Montezuma Hall. But if you notice, $27 million can change Montezuma Hall to Presby Hall and completely torn down and rebuilt, I mean, in a grand way.
Yeah.
So if there's anyone out there who'd like to contribute, we sure would love to put your name on a building or two.
Maybe we could reach out to, you know what, I'll email.
Okay.
Move on. I have some ideas.
All right, next slide, please. All right, so here's where we get to the kind of final section of open session this evening is how do we come up with our enrollment projections for next year? So starting with the fact that a few years ago, we brought in a specialized demographer to come and take a look at our community, our zip code, our families in our neighborhoods, and then the birth rates for our community as well. And what they had projected is over 10 years that we would be pretty stable. We would see a 5% decline over 10 years. And then COVID hit and we doubled that in a single year. So kind of threw that out the window. But at the same time, there was a premise for that demographic study. And it is reliant on the fact that we know there were some certain amount of births in the community, and we know that they were living here at one time, whether they've continued or not. That is something that remains to be seen. And so what we are hopeful for is that there was some grounding of truth in that demographer study, and that it will have some sort of stabilization effect on us in the near future, because global pandemic is one thing, but I think our families are ready to return. They're ready to come back. They live here. They want to go to school here. No one wants to drive outside of their community just to drop off their students. And so we took a look at that study. We did see that they projected that we would be stable these next few years, that we really weren't going to see much of a decline. And so then we went back and pulled our own reports from the census data for birth rates in 91945. And what we did a few things. So we took our current enrollment as of January 11th, 2022. It was a few students higher than our census date. So we wanted to use kind of the more recent enrollment numbers to project where we were going. And then we advanced our students. One grade, we projected what those students would look like. We assumed a conservative 2% decline in enrollment to be on trend with what we were experiencing pre-pandemic. While hoping for that stabilization, we weren't going to count on it because we had been historically trending that 2%. And then we started taking a look at kinder birth rates. We know our kinder population has gone down over the last couple of years due to the pandemic. So we've looked at, will we come back in our kinder format to the growth at which we had expected from prior to COVID? And we are assuming, yes, we're going to see a growth in kinder, but then we're also expanding our current TK program. And so, and this is conservative. A conservative estimate of the number of students that we think are going to come to TK is 96. A few other enrollment projections, such as done by our King Consulting Group for facilities planning, thought we would be a little over 100. So we're pretty close to theirs, and they do this day in and day out. And so with that, the absorption of students declining at a rate of 2%, advancing on their grade levels, this is where we think we're going to land for next year's enrollment on that middle line for 22-23. And the overall net change with the expansion of TK is 12 students. And that's assuming the students are here are going to advance to the next grade. Those that are in 6th grade at the elementary schools are going to matriculate to our schools that have 7th grade. And that our kinder is going to actually expand a little bit as well. All of that coming into play, when we say we're projecting a 2% decline, it's not necessarily on the overall because of this mandate for TK expansion. And this is what it looks like on a per grade basis, but then it varies significantly across the sites. So we'll go into more of that next. And if we go to next slide, this is where we're going to have those conversations about how do we right size our staffing to be more in alignment with our student enrollment and the student populations that we serve. And so the things that we have to consider are our negotiated student loading ratios. So that's with our Lemon Grove Teachers Association. And those loading ratios are TK, next year will be 1 to 12 instead of 1 to 24. Normally you would have seen that as a TK through 3. So then K through 3 is 1 to 24, 4 to 6 is 1 to 30, and then 7 through 8 is 1 to 28. So that's what we have to take in consideration when we start looking at how many people do we have staffed across our schools and how many students do they support. So that ends our open enrollment session. And if there's any questions, we can take those now. Otherwise, I think this would be the opportunity to adjourn to closed session.
Mr. Shibley or Ms. Preciado, do either of you have questions?
I
No.
do not have any questions, sorry.
Not for me either. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. You did a very thorough job.
Okay, then at 6:46, we will adjourn to closed session. Thank you. 8:29, and I will call our open session back to order. The board has no action to report from closed session. So at 8:29, we will also adjourn.